Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, joined in person by my co-host, Rob Dunham.
Wow, what a giant room for a movie recording.
Oh yes, yes. We are in my office, and you can see my movie wall behind me if you're watching on YouTube. So yeah, it's great to have Rob here in person. This is fun.
The people have been clamoring for such a collaboration to happen. So
And it's finally here.
yeah. And it might be a little easier to track our notes and talk about things since we're looking into one camera.
Yes. Yes. Oh man, well, we got an excellent show for you. We're going to talk about the box office, of course, and we're going to get to our top 5 movies of 2022. That's right. It's down to a top 5 movies of 2022, and we're going to get after it. Of course, we'll also do our watch list at the end. You want to make sure you stay tuned for that. And so let's get started.
Yep.
All right, so box office. What we have for results is for the 5th week in a row, we have Avatar: The Way of Water at 32.8 million. It is up over $564 million domestically. Megan comes in at number 2 for the second straight week, $18.3 million. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, 14.5 million. This one is over 100 million. That's very impressive. A Man Called Otto, in its first week of wide release, but its third week overall, did 12.8 million. And following up that at number 5 is Plane in its debut week at 10.3 million. All right, Rob, what you got?
So I think that Avatar is probably going to make enough money for James Cameron for it to be successful.
Especially amazing that we're still not quite at that point yet.
Do we have the amount internationally?
I don't have that one up, but I could look it up
because it's got to be really high at this point. I would think.
Yeah.
The biggest thing though for me in the box office is that Megan still made over $18 million.
Yeah.
That's a good opening weekend for a lot of horror movies. So the fact that it's still doing that number seems to indicate that the merger that we talked about between Atomic Monster and Blumhouse is yielding pretty instant results.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like it's definitely a success on this front. It's hard to imagine them being unpleased with the results.
And in fact, they already announced a sequel to Megan that's going to be coming out March 2024, I believe is what I saw. And it's going to have the same main character and the same girl who plays with the doll in the first movie are both coming back. And they actually, Blum said that he talked about this movie having a sequel before it was even released internally because he thought he had such high hopes for it and belief in it that they would be doing a sequel for this, which on the face of it is, in my opinion, is pretty ambitious for a movie like this, but it seems to bear out that their belief was well placed.
And it's interesting too, because I wasn't sure what to make of this, because there have been a number of like Dog Goes Rogue type horror films before. So it's not like it's a brand new genre. I mean, there's a slightly more techie twist to it, but I wasn't sure what it was going to do. So I mean, it's got to be very pleased.
Yeah, I think they're tapping into that general apprehension people seem to have artificial intelligence going wild.
Yeah, for sure. I got the numbers. Basically, this was from 4 days ago that The Way of Water passed 1.9 billion in global box office. So by the end of this weekend, it will absolutely be over 2 billion.
Just it's crazy.
Which was his bare minimum benchmark to make money on this film.
Yeah, but crazy. Think about the faith he had that it would get to this number, that he would put the effort and resources into it that he did.
Yeah.
Because I think there was doubt from a fair amount of people that it would get to that kind of number worldwide.
Yeah.
People were wondering if there would be an audience for it, if there'd be people clamoring to see it. And I mean, at least there are people going to see it at least once, a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
I don't know if people are going back to see it or not, but it's making a ton of money.
It is weird because the first one had this feel of a cultural phenomenon. This one doesn't, yet it's still making a lot of money. So I'm not sure what to make of that. I'm not sure what to make of. It's not like everyone's talking about it and you're going around hearing everyone, oh, wait, why did you see it? It's not that way, but it just looks like everyone just quietly went and saw
I mean,
it.
like when you can contrast it with a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once, like I heard people talking about that for months.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Online and in person, and I don't feel that way about this movie.
No, definitely not. So I'm surprised. I'm surprised it's making the money it is. Now I think it has done better internationally than it's done domestically, and I think maybe that's some of our reaction to that is based on in America it's just a really big movie, and internationally it's huge. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Any other comments on the box office?
I mean, Gerard Butler, I saw an article this week that he has found his niche as the dad type figure in an uncomfortable circumstance. And I think his movies are just kind of going to be like this.
Yeah.
Like the low to mid double figures for
is Gerard Butler the next gen Liam Neeson?
It's a pretty high bar. I don't know.
Indeed.
I don't know.
Indeed. Wow. Yeah. I was interested to see what A Man Called Otto would do because it had a strange opening. It opened midweek a couple weeks ago, and then it was a more limited release 2 weekends ago, and then last weekend we finally got its like debut, and it did pretty well overall. I'm not sure what they were expecting out of that one, but I would imagine that basically 19 million in 2.5 weeks is pretty good for that. Any other comments on that?
I don't.
Okay. So what is opening this weekend? So this weekend we have several movies. Some of them are around here. I wasn't sure what to do with this because like a lot of the main releases that were on IMDb are not playing in any of the theaters around here. And I'm like, that's really surprising. And then there were movies that are in our theaters that weren't listed under the releases. So I'm not sure about that. But the main one I want to highlight is Missing. And this is the story of after her mother goes missing, a young woman tries to find her from home using tools available to her online. Now, this is, I think technically it's the third movie from this director using the same concept. If you saw, was it 2018 or 2019 Searching, where everything was done through the lens of technology. In other words, it was done, you were seeing a laptop screen, or you're seeing a phone screen, or you're seeing that. You're not actually seeing anything except through the camera. And this is basically the exact same type of feel to it, just a different plot this time. Did you see Searching?
I did not. It looked very interesting, but I never actually got around to
seeing it. Maybe I'll have to lend it to you.
Yeah.
Since, I have it back on the shelf.
Yeah. It could be your recommendation for my movie to watch.
Yes. But it was a really fascinating concept. I wonder how much it can hold up over like multiple movies. Like if it just becomes, similar to the early M. Night Shyamalan, where you have one trick and then you just keep repeating that one trick.
So I'm sure a lot of the success of the movie is down to the novelty of the concept.
Yeah. So that's one of them in the box office. Another one is That Time I Got Reincarnated as Slime, Scarlet Bond.
So the only reason I know about this movie is because I saw a poster for it after I had seen Megan the other week, and we were walking out of the theater and I looked over and saw How I Got Reincarnated as Slime. And I was like, that sounds like a cool title. I don't know if I'll ever see that, but it sounds interesting.
It's interesting on twofold. This one is like not even listed on IMDb as releases, yet it's in both of our main local theaters. So that's something. Also, it's apparently the second one. There was a 2018 one that was just the time I got reincarnated as slime. And this one is I got reincarnated as slime, Scarlet Bond. So I don't know what the difference is, but apparently it's like a sequel of some kind. So this is basically corporate worker Mikami is stabbed by a random killer, is reborn into an alternate world, but he is reborn as slime.
Okay.
Plot twist.
Yeah.
He is thrown into this new world with the name Rimuru. He begins his quest to create a world that's welcoming to all races. Apparently, you can do this as slime.
It sounds like Big Jello is behind this one.
Yeah, clearly Big Jello is behind. It's an anime movie, and I think it does continue the trend of like increased anime box office presence.
Yeah.
We've been seeing that over the last year and a half, really since the box office has reopened. Anime has had a steady presence and has done reasonably well. I mean, all things considered.
Yeah, it definitely has its own niche audience, just like the horror genre does.
Yeah. The next one is When You Finish Saving the World. This is Julianne Moore, Finn Wolfhard, Billy Burke. And the story here is Evelyn and her oblivious son Ziggy seek out replacements for each other as Evelyn desperately tries to parent an unassuming teenager at her shelter, while Ziggy fumbles through his pursuit of a brilliant young woman at school. Not sure that really gives me anything on the plot there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand.
Evelyn trying to find a replacement for herself. It's in the Everything Everywhere All at Once universe.
Indeed. But yeah, so that's that particular movie. This is another one I think that was in our local theaters, but is not listed on IMDb. And then the next one is Alice Darling. And this one stars Anna Kendrick. And this is a young woman trapped in an abusive relationship, becomes the unwitting participant in an intervention staged by her two closest friends. So that is another one.
That sounds serious.
That sounds serious.
Maybe a little too serious.
Yes, probably.
So like there are some movies that you're like, that sounds really good to watch when I'm home alone by myself on a Tuesday night and there's nothing else to do. Not so much going out to the theater and sitting watching it for 2 hours.
We'll talk about this. I had an encounter with a movie like that this past week where I was like, this is too heavy. Like at some point it becomes not entertainment. You're just like, why are you doing this to me?
So I just had this conversation at work today. My one coworker said that she and a group of her friends will often go on a trip once a year, like to the beach, just the wives of the group. And the one girl is always in charge of bringing movies. And she said she inevitably brings something that just doesn't fit the vibe of Girls Weekend. And I asked her for an example, and she told me The Boy in the Striped Pajamas was one that. And she said her friend insisted this has a happy ending. I remember it as a happy ending. It was not a happy ending. And they were like, "Why did you make us watch that?" And
you gotta be aware. This is a trip. If you're gonna have somebody bring movies, you have to trust the person's movie sense. You have to have like a legitimate understanding of what they're going to choose.
And there's a sense of timing too, like and the group of people you're with. You have to understand what kind of movie might appeal to someone. Yeah. Even if it's something you love, it might not be something that
I know
they will enjoy.
Like when I'm having friends over, like I'll try to tailor the list of movies I'm going to give as an offering to the group, the time, place, like the people, have a general sense of what their likes and tastes are. And no, you can't go that way. All right. So the last one is called The Sun, and this is starring Vanessa Kirby, Hugh Jackman, Laura Dern, Anthony Hopkins. And it is Peter has his busy life with new partner Beth and their baby thrown into disarray when his ex-wife Kate turns up with their teenage son Nicholas. Family drama.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds dramatic.
I mean, Anthony Hopkins and huge Jack man, you always gotta like that combination. So
Indeed. Indeed. Really good cast. This one is
Mhm.
also not in either of our theaters.
Interesting.
So I'm not sure what to make of that. It was a very strange weekend for trying to pick out what movies are going to be in the box office. So of all those, I'll recap them. Missing, that time I got reincarnated as slime, saving Bond, or Scarlet Bond. When you finish saving the world, Alice Darling, and The Sun. All right, if you have to go see any of them, which are you going to see?
If I could only choose one, I would go see Missing, but I need to see the first one first.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I would go see Missing. I want to see if that template still works in a different movie, or if it was really just a one-trick novelty. And there's some movies like that. Some movies you're like, I saw that once, I'm done. And then there's some concepts you're like, okay, you did that concept, and it's not as good the second time around. But we'll see. Yeah, my Missing would be the one that I would choose. So, all right, one more kind of story we got to hit over, breaking in the last couple of days. Alec Baldwin has been officially charged with involuntary manslaughter. I think it's involuntary manslaughter over the Rust shooting. If you recall this, we covered this story when it first broke on the set of an indie Western, Rust. Alec Baldwin was given a prop gun and he promptly fired it. It was loaded with legitimate bullets and it killed the cinematographer and wounded the director. This has been a big controversy coming down. There was lots of investigation, lots of recriminations as to how could this happen, what could happen, all these type of things. And so we're waiting to see what would happen, if anything, legally. And so that information now has come out. Involuntary manslaughter, Alec Baldwin has been charged with that. The armor had also been charged with, I think, almost the exact same charges. And the assistant director who was involved in this as well did some kind of plea deal. So I'm not sure what the results on that are. Alec Baldwin has since, through his attorneys, has issued a statement that said it was, to paraphrase this, said it was ridiculous and it's a miscarriage of justice, and he is intent on fighting this. It's a really complicated story, and I'm not sure how to parse it legally. I'm not an expert in Nevada law or in the inner workings of the legal system or the inner workings of the movie industry as to who's actually responsible for this. So basically it comes down to Alec Baldwin said he was handed a gun, and actors don't normally test the gun themselves. We've heard some other instances of people saying no, they do test the gun. So what do you make of this?
I mean, I think as the producer, the kind of top line responsibility resides with him. I don't know it, like you said, I don't know enough about the law to say if this is the correct decision or not. But there was nothing positive that was going to come out of this situation. This there are so many people who share some of the blame in this. So I'm not really sure in a moment like that what justice looks like.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, in my reading of the case, if I were to assign blame, I would put primary blame on the armorer, because that's your job. Like, your job is to deal with the firearms. But I wouldn't absolve Alec Baldwin either, because like, you're the one with the gun, you're the one firing it. Ultimately, it's, there's some level of making sure that everything's the way it goes because you're the one firing it. Like, but I understand a lot of times on your job, like, you trust the people you work with. You know, I mean, if I've never been skydiving, but I intend to try it sometime. Like, I'm not going to check the parachute because I don't know how to pack a parachute.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little different situation. I'm assuming the person who packed my parachute knows what they're doing and isn't screwing it up. But I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to say.
There is another news story that you didn't have in the show notes that I think just came out yesterday, actually, that said Regal is planning on closing 39 theaters coming up here in the new year. They're not going to renew leases. Some of these are like major theaters. In fact, the majority of them are ones based in major cities. Like there's a Regal in New York City, there's a Regal in Miami, etc. I'm sure there are several in each of those cities, but at least one of each of them is shutting down because still being impacted by the reality of the fact that they went almost 2 years without being able to make money from movies. So it's still having an after effect. But I do think that when that kind of thing happens, it does tend to be the bigger ones that are looked at as far as closing, just because the expenses involved in the lease amounts, et cetera, are going to be much higher in a city's situation than they would be in like a Lancaster or York or a smaller town somewhere.
The one in New York City, if it's the one I'm thinking about, is right around the corner from Times Square. Like it's basically in Times Square. And that, you know, the real estate there is ridiculous in terms of cost, and maybe they're just not seeing the benefit there. I've been wondering, because I've seen, even around here, I've seen Regal cut back on some of their show times, like not do afternoons or not do late night showings and just have a much more limited run. I was curious as to whether that was going to be company wide or not. But it looks like it is. So we'll see what happens there. I was kind of questioning some of Regal's business practices through the pandemic and some of their decisions that they were making. Like, is this the smartest thing? But you never know. And so we'll see how they come out. I mean, this is not the first time Regal has had issues that could potentially have taken them down. They were sold, I think, I want to say like mid 2000s or somewhere along that. Like,
and this is
bankrupt and a company bought them out.
This is related to Cineworld, which bought them, having their own bankruptcy issues. So
so we'll see how this affects the larger movie chain and the larger movie world, because they are as interconnected as they are. But we'll see how it goes. I do know that they have not been upgrading the theater in Lancaster. They did some upgrades, I want to say 7 or 8, 6 or 7 years ago. They had done some upgrades to the theater, and those upgrades are starting to wear. And they're not really seeing it fixed.
I can say that where I live in York, the theater I've been going to, which is it's called Frank, it's Queensgate theater, has been, it's a much better experience than the Regal there.
I've been to Frank a few times. It's a nice theater, or at least it was when I did it. So interesting. Okay. And then one final just quick note. It looks like Tron is a go. The third Tron is going to be a go. It's supposed to be a sequel. It's going to star Jared Leto. This has been on again, off again for years now. But apparently it is back on, and I'm not surprised, because Disney also announced there's going to be a Tron roller coaster at Disney coming out,
which sounds amazing.
Which does sound fantastic. And so it makes perfect sense that if you're going to launch a new ride at Disney, that you want to accompany it with an actual movie.
They've got to have some kind of way to include Daft Punk music in this ride.
Yes, I mean, you've got to get these guys out of retirement for this, or at least get one of them. I mean, that soundtrack was amazing. It was so good. So it will not be the same.
And if I know anything about Disney and how they build stuff, I would say that's a very high likely that something like that will happen.
So we'll see. I've been begging for them to make another one now. The first one, the Tron Legacy, came out in 2010. So I've been wanting another one of these since 2010, and it looks like we're going to get one probably. All right, so now we get on to our number one thing we want to focus on, our discussion for the week, the second part of our discussion of the top movies of 2022. movies 5 through 1. So if you joined us last week, if you want to hear us talk about our honorable mentions and numbers 6 or 10 through 6, you can check out last week's podcast. But real quickly, let's just, we don't have to talk about it. Let's just go through each of our lists from 10 through 6 before we get into our next one. So what did you have down for your why don't you just read your list 10 through 6?
So from 10 to 6, I had Prey, The Bad Guys, Glass Onion, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, and The Northman were my 10, 9, 8, 7, and 6.
For me, it was 10 was Operation Mincemeat, 9 was Nope, 8 was Glass Onion, 7 was All Quiet on the Western Front, 6 was Elvis, and that's where we're at. All right, so now we get into the top 5, our 5 best movies. I wonder how many of ours are going to be same. I know there's at least 1 or 2 that won't.
So you already mentioned, so let's go ahead and start. You already mentioned Nope at number 9, and for me that was number 5.
Yes. Okay.
So I really appreciate Jordan Peele's style cinematically and just his sense of humor. He has said in interviews that he thinks he has such a good eye for horror because it has a lot to do with humor. It's the same aspect because you're in both genres, you're setting up something that's a surprise and then dwelling on the emotion of that, like trying to create sparks of moments with people. And I really like this movie a lot. I think maybe in some other years it would be higher than 5, but I just have some other movies I like better. And I think it's certainly unsurprising it was in your top 10 as well. But the reality is it's not going to be as high on some people's lists as it is on mine, just because I tend to kind of lean into this subgenre a little bit more. And although it's not a straight horror movie, there are definitely enough elements in it where it would give some people pause. Probably. Yeah,
I think it's interesting. I put it on my list because it's the most accessible one for non-horror people. But I wonder if some of the reasons why it got some uneven reactions is because it wasn't as much horror. I wonder if that was an issue for some of the people who have been fans of him. But yeah.
All right. What do you have?
All right. Number 5, I have The Northman. I think this was further down.
That was number 6 for me. So.
Yep. For me, The Northman, mainly it was a cinematic achievement. Like the visuals, the settings, the world, it's visceral. It's a visceral world, and you're following this guy on his tale of revenge, and it's really is a tragedy. It's like a tragedy story, like in the formal literary sense, it's a tragedy. And to watch it unfold and to watch it happen and just the brutality of it. It is a, from what I understand, it is a masterpiece of Viking culture storytelling. Like you have to, like, the detail they put into the Viking mythology and what was happening during that particular period is very evident in that movie. I do not have a huge knowledge of Viking history, but you get the sense that they're really hammering in on all the details. As I watched it a second time, the amount of things that hit me, like, it's a heavy movie. There's a weight to it. There's a real weight to it. And it is not as watchable and as accessible as many other movies are, which is why it did not have a super great.
Well, I think we said when it came out, we had the feeling that it would not make a lot of money. With that, it would be really beautiful to look at and brutal, and I think it was all of that. And it's not a movie that, like I said last week, you just like, well, I don't have anything to do. What should I do? Let's watch The Northman. Like, there has to be intentionality behind watching this kind of movie. Yeah, you have to be in the mood for it because it is something. It really is something. All right, what'd you get for number 4 for me is Top Gun Maverick. And I think I said this last week that I think Regardless of the fact that I have it listed at number 4, I think it was probably the most impactful movie of the year in that it got people back to the theater. I think a lot of people who had not gone to movies in a while came to see that, and I think had a carryover effect throughout the rest of the year that they went and saw some other movies too. This movie really surprised me. And this is a movie I feel like I could probably, this in contrast to Northman, I kind of feel like I could watch Top Gun Maverick anytime. And I think it just feels good, like it makes you feel good. If I had to describe it really simply, it really feels a lot like a 90s, late 80s, early 90s action movie. But it's set in the modern era, and I think that's a really impressive achievement. I think that's really hard to make that happen. To some of the callbacks they had, some of the scenes that were similar to the first movie, they didn't feel forced or cheesy. Like they, and that is a pretty high bar, something that's difficult to pull off. So I mean, I could see anyone arguing for it being anywhere in the top 5, honestly, but just for me, it's very much personal preference that I have a few movies ahead of it, because I think it's, in my opinion, any of my number 1 through number 4 really could be in my top 4. So
and while we're talking about it's in my top 5 as well. I'll tell you where when we get to it, but why might as well talk about it now, and I'll give a brief synopsis when we get there. But it was probably the most watchable movie this year. That it appealed to the broadest base possible. The question going into Top Gun Maverick was, will it capture a new audience as well as get the original audience on board? And that's a very difficult thread to weave. And to do it so unbelievably successfully is remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. And I talked about it a couple weeks ago. I was listening to this podcast, and they were doing a 3-part interview with Chris McQuarrie, who has worked with Tom Cruise on a number of things, from Jack Reacher to the recent Mission Impossible movies. And he was describing what it was like to work with Tom. And hearing him talk about this, you really do get the sense that Tom Cruise understands cinema perhaps more than almost anybody out there. And that's a remarkable testament. It's not something you necessarily think of when you think of Tom Cruise, but his understanding of story and his understanding of the movie industry and what people want, and his ability to be flexible and adapt is really remarkable. And all of that came to fruition with Top Gun Maverick. So number 4 for me is Death on the Nile. I do love murder mysteries. I've enjoyed Kenneth Branagh as Poirot. This one, I loved it more the second time than I did the first time, and I liked it the first time. It just felt the first time like it took him so long to get to like the mystery, to get to the mystery, to get into the details of it. But I do love that classic murder mystery, and I think these are the best ones out there. And I did like Death on the Nile better than I like Glass Onion. So because of that, I had to put Death on the Nile ahead of Glass Onion. I had Glass Onion down at number 8. So it was Death on the Nile was going to be ahead of it. I just liked it better. So
I had Glass Onion at number 8 and Death on the Nile an honorable mention, because for me it was the opposite. I liked Glass Onion more, but it's a great movie. I just think it's in some ways, some of the other movies we talked about, it's just very much a slow burn.
It is
type of movie, and that makes it inaccessible for some people.
It took a while to get going.
I enjoyed watching it. I have not seen it since it came out. I should probably watch it again.
It's on a couple of different streaming services.
But yeah, it's definitely a movie that's worth checking out, in my opinion. Number 3, I had Everything Everywhere All at Once.
As did I. Very nice.
I don't even know what to say about this movie, because This movie is insane. I
It
don't
has to be
know how
seen.
else to
It has
describe
to be
it.
seen. You cannot adequately describe the experience of watching this movie. It has to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's just it's a ride
it
from
is.
start to finish. There are so many moments
Mhm.
that make you go, what? And it's also a very, very funny movie, which going into it, I did not like. All I had heard about was like the paradigm shifts, like the
Yeah,
jumping between universes, etc. So I didn't
Mhm.
realize it was also a comedy.
yeah.
And there are some moments in this movie that are like funnier than things I've seen in a lot of
Yeah.
movies.
What it does well is it embraces chaos and it embraces the absurd.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to know that going into this movie is embrace the chaos and embrace the absurd because um that is what it's about.
So it makes me think. I'm just started rereading a book and thinking about this movie. Like spiritually, it very much resides in the same realm as like Douglas Adams,
Mm,
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
yeah, I can
Just
see
that
that.
like
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
is
Hmm.
off the wall, like
Yeah.
nothing is straightforward.
Hmm.
Visually, this is a lot like that writing style, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
there's just a around every corner it seemed there was something brand new.
Hmm.
You're like, oh, this makes sense in the context of the movie, but I had no idea they were going to go there
Yeah.
for this thing.
Yeah. There are, I mean, the phallus obsession is more than a little over the top in this movie. But it is, if you're willing to sit back and just enjoy the ride, it is fantastically entertaining. And they managed to do a pretty good job keeping you up with the story despite the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
One of the techniques, which I talked about recently, they do that with is the main character doesn't know what's going on any more than you do. And so you are figuring things out at the same time Michelle Yeoh's character is. And so as that is coming, you do feel like you're along for the ride with the movie, not like you're trying to figure it out as it storms past you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's tough, especially in a movie with this much going on. But some very interesting acting performances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else on that one?
I think I'm good on that one.
You got everything everywhere?
I got it.
Okay. So my number 2 was listed further down your list also, and that was Elvis.
Mm-hmm.
And I love music movies.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons. And I cannot say I went into this movie as an Elvis fan.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that has this movie so high on my list is that I feel like I left the movie as an Elvis fan.
Mm.
I did not realize some of the depth lyrically that he had in his songwriting. And looking at some of those songs up and the context of them after seeing this movie and seeing some of the stories behind his performances and how soulful he was about some of these things, how emotionally impacted he was by some of his world. I think there's a disservice to the people who are born in my generation that we really only knew Elvis as the fat lounge singer in Las Vegas.
The kind of the cartoonish character,
like the caricature of himself.
Yeah.
I don't think we really had an appreciation for what he was, and there's a reason why he sold so many records.
Mm-hmm.
And Austin Butler is just, I mean, you can't right up there with Rami Malek in Bohemian Rhapsody. It's hard to play a character like that much better, in my opinion. So I have Elvis number 2.
Interesting. Okay. And this is another one that was much lower on your list for me at number 2 is Bullet Train. I had the most fun at the theater this year watching Bullet Train because it's just it brought together several things that I really, really like and really, really enjoy. One, it's the kind of Guy Ritchie style dialogue and brought in with like Brad Pitt Ocean's movie era humor that he brings to it, along with like a Japanese action aesthetic and visual aesthetic. All of those things combine to make it like an extremely enjoyable experience for me. So I liked it more. I know that this one will not be as high on other people's list because objectively there are some issues with it. Like it took too long to get to the end. Like the ending is a little bit of a mess, but it is a really fun movie. It's kind of, I've said this, it's kind of like Quentin Tarantino meets Guy Ritchie. And that's a cool juxtaposition to be able to pull off. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I would say undeniably it was very enjoyable. And I think I said this the other week too. If I had a chance to watch it a few more times, it might have ended up higher on my list, but I only got to see it one time.
Yeah.
Before the end of the year.
I actually still haven't managed to watch it
Yeah.
again yet
Yeah.
either because I'm behind on stuff, but I just had that good of an experience watching it that it came with a list higher.
So much like you and Bullet Train, and you talking about how it's high on your list because you tend to like a certain style.
Yeah.
My number one movie is very much like that for me, and I think it would probably not be number one on many people's lists, but I rewatched it again last night, and I felt even more affirmed in my opinion.
Okay.
The Menu was my favorite movie of the year.
Still have not gotten around to seeing The Menu. I need to.
Rafe, Don't Call Me Ralph Fiennes is he's just phenomenal in this movie. You believe with every ounce of your body he's this character.
Yeah.
And he plays this egotistical, passionate, driven chef. And if you've ever worked in any level in the kitchen, you don't have to have worked at like the highest level. You understand the mentality of some of these people.
Yeah.
And his restaurant basically only opens like once a year. It's on an island. They spend the whole year planning the menu, getting everything ready. Everything is served a certain way for a certain reason. And the movie takes a turn about 45 minutes through that changes everything.
It looked like it was going to be that type of movie.
I would say that it is, and I've talked to a few other people who've seen this movie and liked it, that I would not classify it as a horror movie because I don't think they're out to fool you at any point.
It didn't have a horror vibe. Yeah. It had kind of like,
but it has it's a very dark thriller. Like my wife watched it with me last night for the first time, and she said something that made me realize like this is why this is so effective, because she doesn't usually watch that kind of movie. But there was a scene and things were happening in the scene, something was setting up, and she was able to pick out something bad is about to happen. So it does a really good job of building those moments of tension in you that you're like, I can feel something is coming, and then something does come. And Anya Taylor-Joy is in this, and she is fantastic as well. You think kind of who these people are and where they're coming from, why they're at this restaurant, but then everything shifts and it all changes towards the end of the movie. And in some ways it's not as dark as Joker, but in some ways I kind of got the same feeling, like I understand why someone would feel this way and they would commit to the actions that the chef does. But just sending that message, is that sending that message out to people like really positive thing? Do we really need that? But I just think it's really pretty exquisite piece of art, and that's why for me it's the top movie of the year. And I would definitely recommend watching The Menu if you are into that.
It's absolutely on my list. It's absolutely on my list. And that's one of the things is like this year was an odd year in that most years I would say like most of the movies that we have on our lists, we've seen them all, but this was such a weird movie year that, and my schedule was like that too, where there's some stuff I just didn't see. So for me, my number one, of course, since we haven't talked about it yet, from that is obviously Top Gun Maverick. And I would say the reason why it's number one for me is that it is the movie that combined all of the aspects. It was eminently watchable. It appealed to a very, very broad audience. It was exceptionally well done. And it had a giant impact at the box office, at American cinema. Everyone went to see this movie. It was the cultural talking point. And so once I factor all of those in, I have to put it at number one. And I think it deserves serious Oscar consideration. Movies like this normally don't, but it's an interesting year. So I'm wondering with the impact of it, if it will. So that's why I have Maverick.
Yeah, he'd probably deny it to you if you asked him to his face, but when a movie can make my friend Keith, who's you have seen make an appearance in this podcast, actually shed a real physical human tear, then you know that it was pretty effective emotionally.
Yeah. And I wrote a big long review of it when it came out. It's not a perfect movie, and I pointed out some of the issues that I had with it, but the overall impact it had and how good it was and how difficult it is to revisit a very, very popular movie decades later and not only get all the original fans on board, but to bring everyone else along with it is remarkable. All right, that is our top 10 movies of 2022, and we'll try to get this up on the website as well, so that we can you can read over our thoughts on it, and we will of course be revisiting the top movies come Oscar time, because certainly there will be other movies that creep into this conversation once we talk about what gets nominated and all those type of things. So we'll be back to revisit these soon. Now let's move on to our watch list, movies that we've watched over the last week and what we thought about them. Rob.
So I did say that I watched The Menu again last night, and I've already given my thoughts on that. I've also watched two more movies on my meandering through people giving me recommendations throughout the year, trying to watch at least one a week. I watched Moliere, which is a French movie about an actor playwright who is struggling with wanting to perform serious theater, and he's known for comedy. And so it starts there and then kind of does a flashback to where he was 15 years ago and how he ended up where he's at now. And it's quite humorous period piece. It certainly would not be something everyone would like. You do have to read. It's in French. That's in subtitles. I also watched As Above, So Below, which is a horror movie based around the French catacombs, which is just like really fascinating thing for me in general. And it's a found footage movie. So it's along the lines of like Chronicle or Cloverfield. Obviously when you hear found footage in horror, you think Blair Witch Project, I would say this was a lot more stylistic than that. There's a few different camera effects that are used. I didn't feel like nauseous or dizzy or anything like with them. They did a good job of mixing things together so that you got an idea of what was happening, but there was still a sense of fear. Like the last half an hour of the movie is just kind of goes off the rails in a good way if you like scary things. And then I also saw Megan back on the 13th, so I enjoyed that quite a bit. I'm very interested to see what they do with the sequel to it, because it did seem like a very self-contained story in my opinion, but I can see why it has made the amount of money it has made. It's a very well done movie, and I'm not surprised based on the people who are behind it.
So the first thing I watched this week was Star Trek Generations, and I've re-upped on my subscription to Paramount Plus, and so I've been watching through the series Star Trek: The Next Generation, and so I wanted to go back through the movies to just kind of get one of the things I wanted to get a feel for is how they did things differently between a series, and obviously you have series budget versus movie budget, but you're dealing, and especially in the first movie, you're dealing with like the same ship, like it's the same Enterprise. And so how do you make it feel like a movie, feel bigger, despite the fact that you have the same cast and you have the same ship that you were using on the series? And so what was really interesting, what they did is a lot of it had to do with lighting. The lighting was very, very different in the movie than what you would see in the typical episode of the show. there's one scene where like they really play up the fact that they are orbiting a star. And so you're getting like major sunlight wash over that. It was darker. The lighting was darker and more ambient lighting as opposed to the standard lighting you saw in the series. So that was one of the things that I was looking for, is just how they made it feel bigger and how they made it feel different. It was a little faster paced in terms of how they move things out. And of course, you have better special effects. That's one of the biggest things. You have bigger budget, you get better special effects. So that was the kind of things I watched for there. And then I did make it to the theaters and saw A Man Called Otto. And it was an interesting experience. It really was. I've read some of his other books, but I have not read this one. So I did not necessarily, I had a general feel for what it was going to be. And I wouldn't say it turned out different, but this movie was unexpectedly very, very heavy. Very heavy. And I think overly so, what I would say, overly so, in that I think it was, a lot of it came down to director's choices and editing. There are 3 main and 1 partial scenes that I'm referring to. And I don't want to give away like the substance of the scenes, because that kind of gives away some of the movie, but they let you as the audience linger on these very heavy scenes for a very long time. And there were 3 of them throughout the movie. What that left you with is just like huge weight on you as you're watching this story the whole time. And then there is a payoff at the end, but the payoff is not enough and not long enough to overcome the weight of the rest of the movie. So you leave the movie still kind of in a weight and in a funk about it. And you're not supposed to, I don't think. I don't think you're supposed to. I think you're supposed to, it's a story of character development. When the character comes out on the other side, like it's supposed to be like this grand moment of glorious moment of like, hey, redemption and all this type of stuff. And you don't get there the whole way because of how heavy of it doesn't balance. And so that, I think, to me, takes away from what they were trying to achieve with the movie. Like I said, I haven't read the book, so I don't know if the book does a better job of making that balance. And it was just the way the director's choices were that created that element. But that's, I would say, my main critique of it. So it was much heavier than anticipated. All right, you got anything else?
I don't.
All right, well, that is the show. Thank you for joining us on the Film for Fans podcast. And we're glad that we got to do this person to person. And hopefully we'll get to do it again. Make sure you check out filmforfans.com, where we have lots of content on there and more to come. And tell your friends, and we will talk to you next time. Until then, enjoy the movies.